This content is brought to you by Link2, which makes private equity investment easy. Link2 is a great platform that allows you to get equity in companies before they go public, before they do an IPO. Within their portfolio includes crypto companies, AI companies, and fintech companies. Some of the crypto companies you may recognize include Circle, Ripple, Chainalysis, Ledger, Dapper Labs, and many more. If you'd like to learn more about Link2, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Ron Hammond, who's Director of Government Relations at the Blockchain Association. Ron, great to have you back on.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
So, Ron, Congress is back to work, if I'm not mistaken, this week. And I want to follow up on the two bills that were in the House that were marked up, the stablecoin bill as well as the market structure. What can we expect? Could we, expect some of these bills to go to the floor to get voted on? What's the latest?
Definitely. So just to recall here, there were two big votes, as you alluded to, the stablecoin vote as well as the market structure bill. Those were in the committees. That's like kind of the first step in terms of getting a vote in the House floor. So these cleared the committees. We actually had 6 Democrats and all the Republicans vote for the market structure bill, which was a huge surprise. Again, that was a really tough bill. It was very dense, but at the end of the day, they got across the finish line and set it up for what hopefully is going to be a good bipartisan bill vote, hopefully sometime in the fall. And then for the stablecoin bill, that's where we saw a little bit of derailment. We saw the White House get involved literally hours before the vote happened. We thought that we would probably get a decent amount of bipartisan support, potentially even getting Maxine Waters, the chair of the Democrats' Financial Services Committee. But unfortunately, the White House got involved. It was mostly around the issues of state versus federal regulators. And we have state regulators like NYDFS, the New York banking regulator, who say, look, we believe that we have the role to regulate stablecoins. We've been doing it for quite some time, and we have a good regime. We believe that we have a role here. Whereas the folks at the Federal Reserve and Treasury and now the White House are saying, I think actually it should be done more at the federal level. And we're seeing more Republicans line up, as well as New York Democrats line up with the state pathway and the more broad consensus of the Democrat Party, more aligning with the federal pathway and following the White House. And so now we're going to go here to September, October, November. It's a pretty busy time right now here on Capitol Hill. But the biggest thing right now is a shutdown. It looks like there's going to be potentially a shutdown happening at the end of the month. So everything else, including the crypto bills, FAA reauthorization, and this whole slew of other issues out there, will get put on the back burner until we can actually fund the government. And it looks like this is going to be quite the dramatic push. And so we potentially could see votes on these bills in October, but maybe actually November as well. And the longer that it takes to get these bills voted on in the House means it gets less time for the Senate to potentially take these up as well. And in order for that to happen, though, we need to have a strong bipartisan support for both bills. And I think that's going to be the main crux here, is that if the Democrats in the House, if we get a decent amount of support that bill, it gives more of a reason for the Senate Democrats who do control the Senate to say, we would actually take a piece or look at that piece of legislation. But until then, they need a strong bipartisan support and a vote in the House. And again, I would probably look at October or November for those.
Oh, boy. Yeah, this shutdown is going to throw a monkey wrench in the whole process. And to your point, everybody's going to be focused on that. That's the higher priority. Okay, so October, November, we could expect something. Now, the stablecoin situation is pretty interesting because, like you said, the NYDFS, they obviously ordered BUSD, Paxos to shut down BUSD issuance, but they approved PayPal to go issue their stablecoin. So it seems like a power struggle here. And who do you think might win this battle? Maxine Waters pushing for the Treasury and the Fed to do things on their end, but we know they're moving pretty slow.
Exactly. So there's a lot of players involved here. So we have the crypto industry lobbying mostly for the rules of look, we just need a framework. We don't really engage too much on the state versus federal pathway. For us, a regulatory framework means the business know what they can and can't do, and there's a licensing regime in place. On the other end, though, we have the banks lobbying, for example, and they're lobbying for more the fact that only banks should be the ones issuing stablecoins. It shouldn't be Circle. It shouldn't be Paxos. It should just be the banks. And then finally, at the same front, we do have the federal regulators and a little turf war in terms of, the state versus federal, who is the big dog here in terms of the regulators. And now that battle happens all the time for a variety of financial bills, not crypto in particular. And so I've seen this play out several times. Usually the Fed wins in most of these fights. However, we're seeing a larger majority of members of Congress supporting that state pathway. And again, including the Republicans being all in lockstep. There were no defections on their end. We saw defections more on the Democrat side. So the numbers do favor the Republicans and the Democrats who are supporting NYDFS and others. But at the same time, the White House is a very strong force. And that was enough to get several Democrats who were lined up potentially to vote for in support of the stablecoin bill to back down. And again, most notably Maxine Waters as well. So it remains to be seen. I call this, it's in a holding pattern right now because there is a bipartisan push to get this done. I mean, there's even Maxine Waters, even though she voted against it, she put out an article a couple of weeks ago saying, look, I think we need to get stablecoin regulation done, especially with the narrative more picking up now recently, big tech into finance. And that's more in regards to X or Elon trying to get some money transmitter licenses for Twitter or whatever you want to call it these days. And that also builds off the Libra Facebook narrative. And so I think what we're seeing now is that there's a lot of things in play right now. There seems to be an impetus to get this done because, again, recall there was a report in 2021 from the Biden administration saying Congress has to act on stablecoin legislation. We cannot do this alone. We need to have a congressional authority. So there's impetus here. So we'll see how that happens again on that front. But I'm still shocked even to this day that we were able to get more folks to support the market structure bill, not the stablecoin bill, because that dynamic, it seemed like stablecoins was almost good to go. But of course, it's politics, something that always happens at the last moment. And in this case, the White House got involved. And I think that's also important to highlight, though. The White House would have not gotten involved in this stage if they didn't think this bill was going to become law. 99% of bills don't become law. But in this case, they did weigh in. And I think that's because they thought that, look, this is the time to weigh in. So my hope is that we can still be optimistic in this getting done in some shape or form. But someone's going to have to negotiate a little bit here. And right now, both camps are pretty firm in their positions.
Boy, I can't wait to see how that plays out. But it seems, given that stable coins very much, well, obviously deal with the currency and the Fed and Treasury control the currency, I can imagine that they want to make sure they have their stamp on it. So you have the market structure bill in the House, but there's also the Lummis-Gillibrand bill in the Senate. Is that making any progress, or could that even be an option, or is it just kind of like on hold as well?
I wouldn't say it's on hold. I think it's a really important marker in the Senate. I mean, look, it's very different from the market structure bill that's in the House from Patrick McHenry. There's no question about it. But at the same time, the Senate really hasn't had a regulatory framework bill besides Lummis-Gillibrand. And if you recall last Congress, the FTX bill or the Digital Commodity Consumer Protection Act, DCCPA, that was the other major regulatory framework bill. So there is impetus. There is bipartisan support in the Senate to get something done. But I think what's going to have to happen is the House needs to pass their bill, their market structure bill, and say, look, there is a clear bipartisan desire to move forward on crypto regulation and market structure regulation. Senate, here is a bill. We hope you take up either some elements, all the elements, or even just build off, the work that we've done in the House. A lot of folks I'm talking to and saying, look, that's still a very, very tough needle to thread, especially, again, with the Lummis is more the lead of that Lummis-Gillibrand piece of legislation. And she sits on Senate banking, but she sits in the minority. She's in the Republican Party, and it's a Democrat-controlled Senate. So you really need a Democrat on Senate banking to say, we got to lead this bill. And Gillibrand is on Senate Ag, which is, again, that's a different committee. So we'll see exactly how that plays out. But I think the Lummis-Gillibrand bill is very important. I think it's going to have a lot of elements that either get included potentially in a Senate bill down the road if the House does progress in a good way. But a lot remains to be seen. And finally, I'd like to say we're running out of time here. That's the problem. We've already had the first presidential debate for the Republican Party to see who's going to be the 2024 nominee. And that really starts to derail a lot of the good work here on Capitol Hill. And it actually kind of alludes to the shutdown that we're potentially going to have soon, where folks are really more focused on the election and how important it is, not only for Congress, but for the presidency. And a lot of times the bipartisan work that Congress needs to do falls to the wayside when folks just say, you know what, how can I go on, the main on news or to Fox or MSNBC or whatever to get my political talking points out there. And so that's going to be a very important dynamic to watch. And I know Patrick McHenry in the House understands that dynamic. And that's why he's really pushing hard to say, let's get this done as soon as possible, because Congress is going to grind to a halt potentially this month and definitely in 2024.
Oh, man, I'm hoping they can get something through. And yeah, I'm hoping that before, like you said, the election cycle next year, it's going to be crazy. Now, there are two upcoming hearings where SEC Chair Gary Gensler will be testifying. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, this is going to be actually a really important set of hearings here. So the first one coming up is next week. That's going to be the Senate Bank Committee. They haven't had Gary Gensler in front of them, actually, I think at all this year so far. So it's going to be a very important hearing in terms of getting an update on a variety of rules. Now, mind you, we know a lot about Gary Gensler's approach to crypto, and he's gotten both flack from Republicans and Democrats. But at the same time, he's also done a lot of other rules around ESG and private funds that have also ticked off both Democrats and Republicans. And so I think what we're seeing, and I think the court case is a good example of this, we're seeing an agency really stretch its bounds in terms of what they think they can and can't do. They're definitely going pretty aggressive regulatory route here. And the crypto folks are not happy. The folks on the ESG side are not happy. We're seeing the private funds are not happy. And there's a variety of constituents on Capitol Hill who's saying, look, maybe crypto wasn't the tripwire for me to be angry at Gary Gensler, but this other element or other push he's doing on the regulatory side is not good in my book here. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the popularity of Gary Gensler. There wasn't much to begin with, candidly. I mean, he cleared the Senate with not too much bipartisan support, but he did clear it. That's waning very, very rapidly, especially with the aggressive agenda. So the question is, how much farther can he go as a regulator to push these bounds on a variety of fronts until it realizes that, hey, look, the political blowback is so much here that he has to really rein it in. And the court losses, especially recently with Grayscale and Ripple, are really starting to add up. And we're starting to see other industries who are being affected by the SEC overreach say, hey, look, they're starting to lose in the courts. We're going to file a suit as well on our front. And that's really just going to jam up a lot of the SEC's time and work here. So I think he's going to get a lot of political pushback here, especially in the Senate. It's going to be a little more tame than the House. The House is a little more looking for the jabs there. But I think we're going to see some good bipartisan pushback.
And then there's the meeting at the end of the month with the House Financial Committee. Is that correct?
Correct. The House Financial Service Committee. That'll be on the 27th. And so actually, it's ironic. Coinbase is going to be doing a day on the Hill as well. They do this about once every 6 months, but it's like a big crypto day on Capitol Hill where a variety of projects, as well as Coinbase themselves, present to the folks on Capitol Hill, those who work on those financial service committees and those who don't as well, who don't really know much about crypto, saying, look, here's a lot of the cool things in crypto that you should, as Hill staffers or as members of Congress, really look towards. The future is really bright for this industry. You might have only heard of FTX. I know it's going to be dominating the news cycle for the next couple of months with the trial, but they really want to shift the narrative to look, this is really important to see what all this industry is. It's not just SBF. It's not just FTX. There's a lot of innovation happening on a variety of fronts, both financial and not. And I think that's going to be really, curious timing. I didn't plan it like that where Gensler was testifying the same day they were going. But I think that last week, also with the shutdown probably being that week as well, is going to be very hectic. But for crypto, I think it's going to be really good educational opportunities because behind the scenes, we're educating 300 plus members of Congress and their staffs what crypto is, because a large majority of these members of Congress and their staff, they haven't sat through a crypto hearing. They sit on armed services or they sit on science-based technology or education. They don't deal with these issues. And so we really have to get these folks up to speed very quickly and understand why they should support the stablecoin bill and the market structure bill. And that's a tough task ahead.
And I can imagine there's going to be fireworks at the House Financial Committee hearing because there's many critics of Gary Gensler we've seen historically, and he's gotten grilled by the likes of Tom Emmer and Patrick McHenry and many more. Are you expecting kind of the similar dynamic again that we saw in the last hearing?
I am. I mean, if you recall, Patrick McHenry really led it off with, Ethereum, security or commodity, and he couldn't answer that. He dodged it every single time. We saw criticism on the ETF approvals. Well, now with the court case, they're definitely going to come back to them here in Congress and say, look, we told you that this is something that you should be approving. And the courts ruled 3-0. Two Democrats also sat, those judges, or Democrat appointees. They sat on that bench and said, no, he's wrong. And again, he's losing more and more in his party. And I think that's very important to highlight, especially in this very polarized political system that we currently have, especially the election coming up. He is losing his own party. And that's very much, something that, you usually don't buck your own party. You want to stay united as a front. And they have enough Democrats, again, not just crypto, a variety of issues that are saying, we got to take a pause here, or, hey, look, the courts are putting you in check. Let's reassess what the SEC is doing in their approach, because it's not winning A, and B, it's not winning any friends here either on a variety of fronts. And so I think it's going to be really bombastic. I think it's going to get a lot of tough questions that are going to be really good for the media. But at the end of the day, there's not going to be too much in terms of new relevant information besides maybe the ETF. I think the ETF might get some clarity, at least from him, what he's thinking. What's the strategy of the SEC? Are they actually going to potentially approve these or not? Are they going to say custody or other issues or why we're not going to approve these ETFs? So I think that's probably the one issue that we're going to see a little more pushback here. Maybe Prometheum as well, because he has not testified since the Prometheum situation, and that has been a whole mess, and that's really blown back in their face in terms of giving them the approval when they didn't have a business model to begin with. So there's a lot of content, especially on crypto, that folks are going to hit him on, and he's got to become prepared. So it's going to be pretty interesting to watch.
So let's talk about the ETF for a second. This is purely speculation, of course. With Grayscale winning, and you have a variety of folks applying for the spot ETF, different analysts, like some from Bloomberg, are saying Q4, we could see possibly an approval of a Bitcoin spot ETF. Do you think the pressure is on Gary Gensler and the SEC now, given, once again, the loss in the Grayscale appeal? And all these applicants filing, and they're going on TV, they're talking about it. What are your thoughts?
So he's got a question here himself. Like, is he going to actually approve the ETF? Or is he going to claim another reason? And again, we've had some rumors, I guess, on the Bloomberg analysts you mentioned. Some folks are saying, look, if he was to deny these again and give a reasoning, maybe it's on the custody front. That's going to be another tough battle that I think he's going to probably lose as well. And then also at the same time, we have a bunch of applications in the hopper right now. Do you approve one and then let them get the lion's share of the market? Or do you actually approve them all at the same time? And then these are a lot of questions I think are just candidly, a lot of folks are still trying to figure out. And so I think the hearing itself will be hopefully we can get some information from Gensler on what his strategy is or what he's thinking. Because he does that at a crossroads. If he does deny this ETF and there is litigation that follows, and he does lose that again, it's just going to keep looking bad and bad, worse and worse for him over time. And uncannily, it's going to be really tough to see how it's going to be really good to spin that narrative that, actually, we still shouldn't approve this, because that 3-0 decision was very decisive that he's in the wrong here.
So hard question for you, Ron. And this is also a bunch of speculation, but in the court of public opinion, certainly Gary Gensler is losing the battle. The optics, the SEC and his narrative are falling apart. Do you foresee him resigning at some point? I know it's hard to get him fired. He would have to be impeached and so forth. But is there a possibility of him resigning?
I wouldn't say resigning by any means. I mean, they usually don't resign in these situations. There is a political force out sometimes, very rare in DC, but it does happen. I mean, we've seen it before in the Trump administration where folks were doing more, unethical things like, flying private jets and stuff like that for Tom Price at HHS. And there were enough political pressure saying, hey, look, even Republicans are saying this is not a good look. You got to step down. We're not seeing that as much with Gensler. It's more about the actual policy itself, not more scandalous nature that some folks find themselves into. So for him, I think it's going to be more of, look, the 2024 election's coming up. I think it also depends a lot about who the Republican nominee is. And if Democrats feel a little shaky in terms of, look, maybe we're not going to win this race because of someone at the SEC or some of the regulators being overly ambitious here, there's going to be either a conversation saying, hey, look, you need to really ramp this thing down. Let's cool it here. Let's not try to make any more enemies before going to a major election. Or they might say, look, we even have Democrats in the Senate who won't renominate you. Even if Joe Biden wins, he's going to have to get renominated probably about a year afterwards when his term expires. Mm-hmm. And if the 50 votes aren't there, if there are enough Senate Democrats who say, I'm not going to support you this go around, I can guarantee the Senate Republicans who are not going to be supporting him again. Recall, like Senator Lummis, for example, supported Gary Gensler's nomination because she believed, like many, including many folks in the industry, that his knowledge of the industry will help him be a better regulator in terms of finding the appropriate regulatory regime. That hasn't happened. It's actually been quite the opposite with regulation by enforcement. And so if it becomes a political liability, those conversations at the White House will happen. It's getting there at this point. But like I say, it's not be just crypto that trips that wire. And I think him going after private funds and being aggressive on ESG, that's just going to be enough where the 50 vote threshold may not be met, and he's going to find himself in some hot water. So we'll see, but no resigning, I think, at least at this stage.
Well, I can't wait for the day he's fired or resigning. I think I echo the statements of a lot of folks. Final item here. There was some news around the IRS and the Treasury as it relates to taxes and crypto. Tell us what you're hearing about that.
Yeah, so this has been in the works about 2 years now. So if you recall, the infrastructure bill, they were trying to find a way to pay for a lot of the infrastructure. And one of the more scandalous provisions that came down to the last second was the broker provision. Who's going to be doing 1099 to the IRS? It makes sense for Robinhood and Coinbase. These guys collect that information, they send it to the IRS. That makes sense. If you're a miner, if you are a DeFi protocol, you don't have access to this information, but also you don't collect it. You also aren't performing the same task. How are you going to report to the IRS? That's where the main question is. So the IRS actually, or the Treasury Department, came out with a less bad version, you could say, of that broker rule 2 years later, and they're doing a notice and comment period, which is, again, we're happy to weigh in. I think that's actually a very important, transparent process, and I think it's also good to highlight to like the SEC being regulation by enforcement. The IRS is at least saying, look, public opinion, please weigh in. So a lot of folks are weighing in of why it's important to have this rule tweaked. But it has a lot of implications, again, mostly for DeFi and miners, and actually even website and front ends and NFTs. And so a lot of folks can get captured by this really broad definition, and that could cause a lot of harm here. So we'll see, after October when the comments are done, what exactly is going to happen. But I will say the other thing is to look at Congress. Congress is actually looking at a lot of tax issues. I've had a lot of meetings recently on staking. I think staking is going to be picking up, at least in terms of conversation of what is a tax task for staking. There's also questions about, Senator Wyden from Oregon. He's a Democrat, as well as Senator Crapo from Idaho. They're the lead of Senate Finance. They've actually put a request out to the public saying, look, by September 8th, we just want to hear, what does a crypto tax look like? They wouldn't be asking these questions if they weren't thinking about doing something down the road. So I think it's really important to watch that while the securities versus commodities and the SEC takes a lot of the bandwidth, and so is the ETF recently, don't keep your eye off the IRS as well as Treasury and tax. That's a really important issue. Taxes issues are obviously get a lot of fanfare here, and I think it's going to be really important to see exactly, will there be legislation coming out on this front? Will there be more political pressure to say, hey, look, Treasury, change this rule, because we do have good bipartisan support, especially on the broker rule, to get that tweet. So we'll see how it all plays out, but keep an eye on tax issues for quite some time.
Yeah, I think that's certainly important. It's probably not getting the coverage that it should. Like, I'm actually concerned about the staking because I stake and I want to know how that's going to impact my taxes, because often I am not cashing it out, so to speak, to fiat. It's just they're doing its thing, compounding. So that's a key, and how volatile the market is. So hopefully, well, the good part, like you said, they're open to comments and they're waiting to get feedback. So that's good.
Exactly. And that's what we asked for. Look, we think it's really important to have an open, transparent process. Again, Congress provides a lot of that, where you can see the bill text, you can see the amendments, you can know when the votes are happening. Regulators are a little different, but when you have regulation by enforcement, it's not the public can't weigh in. They just go, this is bad, you can't do this. And, we're going to just go after the next person who does something similar or completely different in some cases. So, or in some cases, obviously with the CFTC, there's conflicting regulatory actions, and that causes a lot of more market confusion. So we are always say, look, we always appreciate the public to be able to weigh in on these regulatory proposals. And the hope is that the comments that the public provides, including, Blockchain Association, Congress, and others, will help them more narrow the rule, or at least tailor the rule appropriately, so that actually makes sense and captures what they want to capture. But at the same time, understand that there are different elements of the crypto sector that just don't have access to this information and don't have the ability to report.
Real quick, and it just came to mind, the Tornado Cash situation and the actions that were taken against the folks who are running it and so forth. Is the Blockchain Association doing anything around that? I know you guys have put out some literature and things like that. What's happening with that situation? I think the U.S. government got it wrong there, but I would love to get your take.
Definitely. And I think this is going to be actually a major theme of the rest of the fall. While we're talking about the SEC and Treasury, the national security piece is actually going to be a huge bubbling issue here. So what's happening right now, the Tornado Cash, as you mentioned, it's a huge case going on right now. Coin Center is a nonprofit think tank here in DC. They're really leading the charge of fighting that. The Blockchain Association and others have weighed in through amicus briefs and as well as other literature, as you mentioned. But at the same time, on Capitol Hill, we're seeing this right now as well. Senators are getting these classified briefings, and members of Congress in the House. And the briefings are really the takeaway we're hearing from folks and staff who talk to the members of Congress afterwards is They're being told that the North Korea nuclear program is getting a lot of funding from the Harmony Bridge hack, the Axie Infinity hack, and several others out there, like the Ronin Bridge. And that's being through cybersecurity issues. That's kind of trickling down to their program. They're cashing out of these foreign exchanges in Russia or in China and trying to use that money and ill-gotten gains to fund nefarious activities. We're also seeing that with China and fentanyl. And so again, the upside of this transparency nature of crypto is that we know where this money is going. We can watch it in real time, unlike the traditional finance system. But the message that the folks on Capitol Hill are seeing is that we are putting sanctions in place. We're putting, a lot of barriers in place to prevent North Korea and China doing these illicit activities. And crypto seems to be helping them enable it. And we have to tell them, look, it's not a crypto problem. It's a cybersecurity problem. And that's usually what it comes down to. But the message that's still been received on Capitol Hill is cybersecurity, crypto, whatever the problem is, the end action is still that these bad actors are getting illicit gains in crypto. We got to clamp this down. And I think that this theme and narrative is going to be very important for the next several months because we've already seen legislation like Warren Marshall, the CAN-C Act, and these are very important bills that are going to be pretty much the essential fight for DeFi. How is DeFi going to say, how do we protect privacy, but also at the same time, how do we comply and prevent bad actors from getting illicit gains here? So stay tuned for this fight. This is going to be a major issue for months to come. And candidly, I don't know how it's going to end up, but I will say the last thing, when it comes to privacy versus national security on Capitol Hill, national security usually wins in these fights. And so it's going to be really existential for crypto and again, DeFi especially.
Oh yeah, I can certainly imagine. Ron, always great information, my friend. Thank you so much for joining me.
Anytime, happy to help.